collectors, and welcome to another Bossk's Bounty video, and welcome to episode 237 of Ask Boss Bounty. This is the weekly Q&A series that drops every Sunday, where I basically answer your questions. So if you do have a question for next week's episode and you want to be featured in the video, be sure to leave that question in the comments section of this video. And as I said, hopefully your question will be chosen next week. This week's episode is sponsored by VC37 for episode 237, and it is the Super Battle Droid. Now, unfortunately, I don't have that card back version available at the moment. It's in storage somewhere, but I do have the loose version of the figure, and it's a pretty cool looking figure there. Maybe one day we could get an updated version of him. He struggles to stand a little bit. You have to be a bit delicate with him, but he looks pretty good, and I use him in that sort of flashback scene from The Mandalorian against the Death Watch guys there, because I don't really have enough Jedis and things like that to go in a full Attack of the Clones scene. But still, I like the figure and I would like more of them. So there you go. That figure is sponsoring this week's episode. And if you do happen to enjoy this week's episode, hit the like button down below. Subscribe if you're new. Literally just passed 29,800 subscribers, which means we only need 200 more to hit the magical 30,000. So if you haven't subscribed, do that now to help me get there, please. Thank you so much. And with all that being said, let's get on to the first question. Molecule5354 says, question for next week. Great episode as usual, BB. With the cancellation of the Acolyte series, do you think Hasbro will repurpose the molds of the various Jedi figures, Soul, etc., and perhaps give us other Jedis from the prequel trilogy, such as members of the Jedi Council or maybe a Kellerin Beck figure? So I think when I reviewed the Soul figure there, I did kind of mention that the body of him could potentially be used for prequel era Jedis, and I think a few people in the comment section below said no, the costumes are completely different. Now this is where the attention to detail really does come in, because some people may not be overly bothered about that. They'll just be happy to get, you know, a repainted version of that body as a prequel Jedi. Other people will be saying no, as I said, the outfit is completely different. So I thought I'd just quickly bring in Mace Windu. So this is a pretty old figure. It's pretty terrible, to be honest. And, you know, there's his costume versus Soul. So let's just check out the differences here right now. So you can see that Soul does have a much bigger belt area. And also the collar comes down a little bit further. But he does have those two sort of like tabards coming down on the front. So, you know, it's really up to you how you feel about that. Me personally, I'm not really too bothered. I think I could handle some prequel era Jedis based off of this body, but let me know in the comment section below if not, because I know a lot of you are, you know, real sort of attention to detail people, and that just would not do. And if we're going to get prequel era Jedi, first thing they need to do is give us like a new Qui-Gon Jinn or something like that, or a new Mace Windu, and then build off of that one. J-Loz says, hello there, Bossk's Bounty. I have a question for next weekend. Do you think Hasbro should re-release the Tusken Raider? And if they do, it makes sense if they release a Bantha for the return of Tatooine next year and release the Bantha with a new Tusken Raider. So first of all, I don't think they should re-release the Tusken Raider. They've already kind of done that, and also it's not really up to today's standards if you take into account the 4-pack of Tusken Raiders that we got from the Book of Boba Fett. They have much better legs, they have the barbell hips. However, you do mention there the Bantha, and of course if we did get a Bantha, then any Tusken Raider that needs to sit on top of that Bantha probably would need barbell hips. So very much like they've done with the Mandalorian, they've updated his hips so he can sit on the blurg. You know, a Tusken Raider would need to be done as well. So I wouldn't want them to re-release the current Tusken Raider, but I feel if they ever did release a Bantha, whether that be for Return to Tatooine or not, then of course a new Tusken Raider would be needed for that. Pesto Pizza 2001 says, hello BB, question for next week. I finally got around to watching the Acolyte episodes 5 and 8 were good because of the character The Stranger. Seeing as the show is cancelled, do you think Hasbro will make this character into a figure? Quite frankly, Hasbro should have made it first along with Soul. Yeah, I mean that would have been the ideal scenario, wouldn't it? That we got the good guy and the bad guy from the show. That doesn't always work out. The only kind of excuse that I can give them is that maybe they didn't get the source material for that character. Lucasfilm often like holding things back for like the surprise element of a show, and considering the Black Series do not have that figure either, that kind of might be the case. Now, just because the Acolyte has been cancelled or it hasn't been renewed for season 2, I don't think that really will affect whether we get the Stranger or not. I think he's probably got a big enough following that we'll get that figure anyway. Pretty sure the Black Series collectors will get it before TVC, but I kind of think if there's one character from that show that we will definitely get, it will be the Stranger. Brian Sanders says, great video as always, Tim. Question for next week. I'm more of a carded collector instead of an opener, except for a few things. Since you're both a carded and loose collector, as a display environment, what would your thoughts be on a World Between Worlds basic playset with doorways leading to other environments? More of a Rebels Ahsoka Mortis release, but I wouldn't think it'd be too expensive while creating new possibilities for people's displays. Now, I can completely understand why you're asking this question, because I can kind of sort of envisage what you're thinking of. You'd have like 2 different environments on your display and then the World Between Worlds in between them both, like connecting them together. In my opinion, these playsets that they release, whether it be the Tantive 4 or the Jabba's Palace playset, etc., need to be things where lots of different figures can be placed on them. The last thing I want on a shelf is a big playset where like maybe 2 or 3 figures go, and I feel that the World Between Worlds would kind of be like that. And I feel the flooring that they're standing on would just be clear plastic as well. I think with the World Between Worlds, it's the sort of background, like the space scene around them, which is like the more interesting part of it. So in my opinion, of being a loose collector, you know, I can't really see that being something that I would really want necessarily in my collection, but I can see why you're asking and see why you think it would be pretty cool. I just prefer things where you can get lots more of your figures on there, basically. Jonek2205 says, question, are there beard variations of the new deluxe Zeb? So as far as I'm aware, I don't think there are. However, I do think there are variations of the paint scheme on the top of his head. I'm not too sure which variation I have. Mine has kind of like a few black stripes on there, but I think there's one that's like a little bit more of a cartoony style. I think this is what I've seen on the internet, on Facebook groups and things like that. I can't compare them because I don't have the other one, but in terms of his actual beard itself, I'm not too sure about that. I'll have to look into it. Graham Dean 2962 says, hey boss, question for next week. With the recent release of the Black Series Revenge of the Sith Sidious, do you think we'll get a Sidious in 3.75 inch from Revenge of the Sith and a much needed updated Anakin Skywalker stroke Darth Vader from Revenge of the Sith with cloak and maybe the red eyes from when he goes to Mustafar? Thanks for all you do. So both of those I would absolutely love in my collection. I've never really rated the previous Sidious that we've got in Revenge of the Sith, so that one that they released in the Black Series looks absolutely perfect, and I would absolutely love for them to do that in the vintage collection. I do feel that the Anakin Skywalker is probably more likely out of the two of those, and I feel with the new Anakin Skywalker that we're getting from the Ahsoka show, I feel the bottom half of that figure could potentially be used. I mean, this is what I've seen a lot of people say as well, that, you know, at least some of that new figure can be used for a Revenge of the Sith Anakin. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be doing it. I just think it raises the possibility over the Sidious figure, for example. But for sure, both of them I would absolutely love in TVC, and I just think in general, more Revenge of the Sith would be cool. Channel member Shannon Patrat says, greeting boss, question for next week. I'm noticing a trend in TVC towards fewer and fewer paint applications in the last several waves of figures. It seemed like when I first started collecting TVC, Hasbro was really pushing the boundaries on paint deco, whether that be on the weapons and accessories or weathering effects. Even the most recent vehicles and playsets seem to have fewer paint apps. Do you think this is a downturn in the line as a whole, or is it just a pressure to get out more figures vehicles every year? I've got to be honest, I don't know exactly what it is, but I just definitely know it's a thing that's happening. I've noticed it over the last few months, maybe even year, and it all came to a head when I reviewed this figure here, the Assassin Droid, just the other day. Check out that review if you haven't already. But that figure has very, very few paint applications, even compared to the previous release, the red version. So this one even has like lots of sculpted in battle damage on his torso, and they just haven't bothered to paint him whatsoever. And for me, that is like really concerning. And in fact, that should be one of the most concerning things that's going on with TVC right now. Not, you know, what they're not making, what they're making too much of. It should be about what we're actually getting right now and the quality of what we're getting right now, because for me, this really isn't acceptable, this figure here. He should have a nice wash over him to make him look, you know, worldly or whatever, and he should definitely have the paint applications for the battle damage on his torso. yeah, I'm not really too sure what else to say about that. I don't know the full reason. I suspect that costs of making figures has gone up, and specifically paint deco costs have gone up. And instead of making sure that the TVC figures that we're getting are still of a certain quality, they're skimping out on these to save costs. Ultimately, I feel sometime in the future, if we want those sorts of things back, then potentially we're going to have to pay for it. And that's just something that happens with all sorts of reasons, whether it be shipping costs or inflation costs, or on this occasion, maybe it's production costs. It's a shame, and it should be highlighted. Mouse Crumb says, I want Hasbro to do more low-hanging fruit. Jizor and Pong Krell would be nice, but where's all the easy stuff? Shadow Scout with Speeder, Sand Troopers, Barada, Shadow Guard, Bith with tan robes, Clones, Troopers, Officer repaints, Mossep, Padme, Plagueis, Black Series reissues. So yes, you do have a point, and Hasbro do tackle low-hanging fruit all of the time. It's just that in the last year or so, all of the low-hanging fruit that they've tackled are this sort of thing. Your Mandalorian judges, basically. You know, anything Mandalorian that we've got that's easy for them to do, repaints, that is where they've done that low-hanging fruit. We did get a few officers as well. They've used that officer sculpt, and they've used the X-Wing pilot. And of course, you know, things like this, getting 2 figures out of 1 mold, that's the kind of low-hanging fruit that they've been doing. They haven't been doing all the other stuff that you've mentioned. But as I say, they can't do everything, but that's where your low-hanging fruit is coming from, if you are wondering. Clemera 205 says, hi BB, greetings from Switzerland. Thank you very much for all your work on the channel. Question for next week. There is some rumours saying that Hasbro would completely stop the production of Star Wars toys in 2027, TVC and Black Series. Why 2027? Because it will be the 50th anniversary of A New Hope, and potentially a last chance to create a lot of figures for Hasbro in order to celebrate this event. And what next? Have you heard anything about this? Will Hasbro sell its license in 2027? Thanks in advance for your answer. I've got to admit, I've heard nothing about this. This is kind of the first I've heard of, you know, Hasbro selling the license. I mean, can Hasbro even sell a license? Doesn't it just run out and they don't renew it? They don't agree with Lucas, and then Lucasfilm sell the license to another company. So I guess really what we need to do is find out when their license expires and if they've renewed it or not, and for how long, rather than them selling it, I guess. I'm All the Sith says, ask Bossk, if Hasbro were to make an Emperor's throne room, how big would you want it to be? Could either do a Jabba's throne room type set or a HasLab, including the underneath throne area and elevator. I've got to say, I wouldn't want the Emperor's throne room to be made as a HasLab. Again, this comes back to, you know, how many characters are actually in that throne room? You've got the Emperor, Vader, Luke, a couple of Emperor's Royal Guards, and a couple of advisors. That's about it, isn't it, really? So to me, that would be a kind of a waste. I know we did get that sort of convention exclusive version, which wasn't really a playset. It's more of like a, you know, a fun way to do something for an exclusive. But I feel what Lego have done with it before, where you've got, you know, obviously the throne and the backdrop, and then maybe a set of stairs and those 2 things on the outside, which are like, I'm not even sure what they are, like control panels or something. Maybe that's about all you would want to do for those. And then you can set up your Royal Guards and your Emperor and your Luke and Vader fighting. That's about it, really. I can't really see what else you'd really want from that. Farrell Kappa says, hey man, great video as always. Now I've sweetened you up, can I ask a 2-parter? Question for next week, what different clone variations would you like to see? I put the Phase 1 clone pilot on my last figure standing list, and if they were to have a clone 4 pack, it would be sweet to include the Phase 1 and Phase 2 helmets. And with the plain armors, they could be interchangeable. Is that a stretch to ask from them? Cheers, dude. So the second part of your question, yes, I probably think that is a stretch too far, otherwise they would have done that already. At the end of the day, if they gave you a set of clones and gave you the interchangeable helmets of Phase 1 and Phase 2, that would pretty much half the amount of money that they can make, basically by selling 1 pack of Phase 1s and 1 pack of Phase 2s, which is probably why we haven't seen them do that already with the new clones. In terms of your first question there, the clone variations that I would like, man, there are many. The clone pilot is definitely one of those. This guy, the Kashyyyk Trooper, man, I would build an army of those. They are super cool, and I've mentioned it before, the Galactic Marine as well. Those 2 are probably the ones that I want the most out of any clone trooper now that we do have Phase 1 and Phase 2, you know, standard clones. Of course, there's loads of paint variations of those, officers, different units, different battalions, things like that, but this guy, for me, I would love for them to redo that one there, and the Galactic Marine. So, yeah, they're the two for me. Channel member Steve DeBurse says, "Hi, Bossk. Hope you're having a good week. Question for next week. Do you see that Hasbro are now actively engaged in March Madness and Last Figure Standing as a basis for their plans, or do you think it may influence future developments where they may actually create exclusive figure packs for Hasbro Pulse or some form of HasLab? Thanks as always, Steve." No, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think Hasbro are a huge company, and they've obviously got marketing professionals there, and they obviously conduct their own market research, and they always have done, and they still do. I just feel that if a figure or a character wins a particular fan poll, then hopefully that correlates with what they're already thinking about. And if it does, then great. And maybe one day they're all sitting around a table having a conversation about a particular figure, whether they should do it or not. And they've got their own market research. And then they realise that it did really well in March Madness or Last Figure Standing or other fan polls. Then I think it just reinforces the fact and correlates with their decision making, basically, and might help something get pushed over the line. But I definitely don't feel that, you know, just because a figure wins a certain fan poll that it automatically gets made. I don't feel like we have that level of influence at all. And you've got to remember as well, they have Lucasfilm to answer to as well. James Andrews says, "You keep mentioning vote for the figures you want, but we've not heard anything about Pong Krell. Do you think he's actually getting made?" So this goes back to my previous point. Yes, I always do say, you know, in fan polls, vote for the figures that you want, because that does potentially help Hasbro make a decision on things that they're already thinking about doing, or it might highlight a figure that they maybe haven't thought about, and then they'll investigate it further. Now, we look at previous winners of March Madness. Some winners like Bo-Katan, for example, they would have been making that figure anyway, no doubt about it. You know, one of the biggest characters of the Mandalorian series, they would have been doing it without a doubt. So we would have had no influence over that whatsoever. However, I think Dooku, didn't he win maybe the first ever March Madness? I think. Might have been the second one. I can't really remember at this point in time, but he won one of the March Madnesses, and I think it took 3 years for them to make that figure. So that gives you an idea, you know, even though Pong Krell won it last year, that does not necessarily mean, you know, because he's won a fan poll that 2,000 people have taken part in, that he automatically gets made. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. Having said that, I do agree that Pong Krell would be a pretty good figure for them to do. And if he was already being sort of talked about at Hasbro, then they'll look at the results of March Madness and say, look, fans are voting for this figure. We've thought about it in the past. Let's do it. And that's kind of how I feel it works. Pop Crash says, as a Black Series collector who backed the Cantina, I decided to collect OT vintage as well. Recently bought the Jabba set and the Throne Room, with Lego releasing a new Slave Leia labelled as Princess Leia. It's looking like that version of her is not off the table. What are your thoughts on her showing up as part of the Return to Tatooine line? The poster seems to imply this theme is only based around A New Hope, though. Okay, so I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, and I'm standing by what I said. I think it's always been a bit of a myth that Lucasfilm have always said that you know, you cannot make the Slave Leia figure regardless of what they call her, whether it's Hutt Slayer Leia or whatever. You know, I don't think it's ever come from them that they say, we can never do this figure. I've always maintained that the reason we're not getting those figures anymore is because maybe Hasbro don't want to do them. It's not the fact that Lucasfilm are telling them that they can't do them. And it goes back to when the Black Series HasLab Rancor was running. Everyone was screaming that they wanted Oola. And one of the people that work at Hasbro, it may have been Steve Evans, but I don't want to say for certain because I don't want to put words into his mouth and say something that he didn't say. But it was somebody there said in the comments, you know, I'm not even sure that we can do an Oola figure anymore. You know, suggesting that these sort of like half-dressed ladies, they just can't do them or they won't do them. So that's my thoughts about it. So even though Lego have done that, I'm not too sure Hasbro will. And of course, there is a big difference between a tiny piece of squared plastic to a action figure which has, you know, body parts basically. And that's the kind of the difference. But of course, this doesn't mean that Hasbro will not do it in the future. You never know. It might just be someone else leading the team that feels, yeah, we can do that figure. And as long as Lucasfilm doesn't have any objections, which it seems they don't because Lego have done it, then those figures will come. Andrew Cook says, hey BB, question for next week. I've been watching different videos people made for their last figure standing list, and the Snowtrooper is unsurprisingly a popular choice if they follow the Return to Tatooine campaign with a Return to Hoth campaign. What figures would you want to see, and do you think they would add any creatures or vehicles? And what do you think the best choice for a Hoth playset would be, keeping within the $60 size playset? Maybe a Hoth control room with a female rebel trooper. yeah, so that's kind of what I envisaged them to do if they were ever to do Hoth. Like a control room there, you could get quite a few of the different characters in there, which is what I've said about playsets before. You kind of need that. I would love for them to do the Wampa. I mean, the Wampa that we got in the Last Jedi packaging was a pretty good Wampa, but one in TVC in that classic boxing would be pretty awesome. Or maybe the playset is outside with the actual Battle of Hoth, where you've got like a turret. You know, we've seen them do these things before in the Legacy Collection. And even in the Vintage Kenner line as well, you know, they did like a snowy scene and things like that with the turret and the Probot and what have you. But yeah, there's loads of things that I'd love for them to do in Hoth. You know, we're getting the new Chewie. You could do a snowy Chewie. And I've got the Han Solo here, of course. You know, we definitely need this card back in the TVC line, and the figure itself needs updating as well. I'd love for them to do a new Han Solo in his Hoth outfit. You know, also the Legacy Collection Tauntaun, the Han Solo version one. We've got the Luke Skywalker's one. We need the Han Solo's version. It is different. And, you know, you could have the split belly if you wanted to and things like that. So, you know, there's loads of things that they could do for Hoth. Absolutely loads. MechDJ says, hi, BB. Your shows are always so warm, informative and passionate. It's infectious. Thank you, buddy. He says, my question for next week is, with all of these Return to Tatooine releases going on, do you think we'll get a new land speeder all weathered up with Luke, Ben, or even 3PO in the near future? Keep up the great work, mate. Yeah, so when talking about Return to Tatooine, you know, we've already had a playset announced. It wouldn't surprise me if we got a vehicle announced, and one vehicle that does stand out is the land speeder. And if they were to ever to do that, I would hope that they would update it, because I've said before, you know, the version that we have, albeit is pretty good, it doesn't really fit the figures. It needs to be a little bit bigger, basically. And I could definitely see them doing it. We'll have to wait and see what they do, of course. But yeah, Luke's land speeder would be a good one to include in that sort of Return to Tatooine theme. Luke Skywalker says, another banger vid, Tim. I noticed in this week's video you tend to use the word buddy a lot. Just curious if you've been hanging around Canadians a lot. Just kidding. Question for next week. Do you think we'll ever get Captain Carson Teva from The Mandalorian and Ahsoka as an action figure? Actor Paul Hung Lee is a fellow Canadian like myself, and we are both the same age. He's a very cool guy, and I think both him and many Star Wars fans would love him to have a figure. We could also do a head swap and have Porkins. Sorry, my comment is long-winded. Love you, buddy. So buddy is used in the UK as far as I know. I mean, yeah, I use it a lot. I do apologise. But in terms of Carson Teva, absolutely, I think that's one that we desperately need in TVC. And I have mentioned that he could potentially be used for a Porkins as well. And loads of people sort of slam me down for that one, saying, no, Porkins is much bigger than him. But I don't know. I think you could probably get away with it in the pilot's uniform anyway. But yeah, for sure, Carson Teva is definitely one that I'd like to see them do. And I believe I've heard this rumour before that Paul has actually had his body scanned and whatever by Hasbro, so potentially they could do it. Whether that's true or not is another matter. Don Von Carr, who is a new Patreon supporter, so thank you so much for becoming a patron and supporting the channel, buddy. I really do appreciate it. He has a question. It says, do you think we'll get a new C-3PO soon? Hasbro should do a Build-A-Droid type 3PO with interchangeable parts like gold leg, red arm, eye out, head, green slime chest plate, and a net. If you want to do an episode 5 3PO, that would be an awesome deluxe figure. I completely agree with you, buddy. You are talking my language. C-3PO is the #1 figure that I want. Everybody knows this right now, purely because of the reasons that you've mentioned there, all the different 3POs you can get out of it, but also other protocol droids across the Star Wars universe. I mean, there are plenty of them in all of the new media shows, so I just feel it's something that Hasbro need to do, and do it soon. Alright then guys, that's it for this week's episode. I want to thank everybody for watching, and thank you for submitting your questions. Please submit your questions for next week's episode. Let's keep this series going. Thanks to my Patreon supporters and channel members as always. Your support means a great deal to me, as you know, so thank you so much. Thanks for watching everybody, and we shall see you on the next one.